I was elbow deep in binders, flipping through the last few pages before the big merger meeting started. The clock was ticking, and everyone was circling like sharks, waiting for the moment they could claim victory. Derek Langford, the CEO, stood at the head of the table with that smug look of his, like he knew everything and everyone else didn't matter. I'd been with Harmon Freight Group for 11 years, started as a facilities guy, then worked my way into internal logistics and contracts, unofficially, of course. I spotted an issue in the licensing clause of the merger agreement, something no one had flagged, a small detail that could cause a massive problem if it went unnoticed. I pointed it out, expecting a nod of recognition. Instead, Derek chuckled like I was some kind of joke. "We've got attorneys for that," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "You're a glorified office manager, not a lawyer." Laughter bounced off the walls, and I felt my face go hot. But I didn't flinch. I just nodded and kept my voice level, just making sure we're covered. I walked out with my face calm, but my stomach felt like it had dropped out of my chest. I wasn't angry, not exactly, but something inside me shifted. I was done being the invisible guy who kept everything running behind the scenes. I knew where the bodies were buried, and I was done pretending not to notice. I sat there, eyes stinging from hours of staring at the screen, the office's fluorescent lights flickering in and out. The sound of the clock ticking, soft and relentless, was the only thing that kept me anchored to the moment. I wasn't supposed to be here, after hours under the radar, but no one else was going to catch this. No one had before. I cracked open the merger contract again, the 400 pages laid out in front of me like a maze. I'd been through it once, twice, 3 times, but the details buried under all the legalese were like ghosts, flickering just out of sight. Derek wasn't paying attention to the specifics. He was too busy with his big picture speeches, slapping himself on the back for securing a $120 million deal. But there it was. Somewhere around page 260, in the middle of what felt like 1,000 words strung together to make them sound smarter than they were, I found it, a dormant licensing clause. It was buried so deep, it barely stood out, just a few lines in a paragraph that had no real business being there. A clause meant for worst-case scenarios, according to the wording. It allowed a third party to buy the rights to Harmon's core logistics software for a flat fee of $5 before the merger. I leaned in, rereading the words, as if doing it over and over would somehow change them. But no, it was still there, clear as day. And if that clause was activated, if someone actually exercised it, the whole deal would be screwed. Derek's shiny $120 million merger would crumble into dust. I sat back, hands resting on the desk, heart pounding a little faster now. The clause had been a contingency, something put in place for an emergency, but now it wasn't just an emergency, it was a bomb. I had to know if it was still valid. I pulled up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. It rang twice before someone picked up. "State compliance," came the voice on the other end, tired and flat. "Hey Matt, it's me." I didn't need to say my full name. He knew who it was. "Woo, long time, no here. What's up? Look, I need you to check something for me. Fast. It's about that old dormant clause in the merger documents." Matt's tone immediately shifted, like a switch had been flipped. "Yeah, I remember. That's some weird shit. I need to know if that clause is still in effect." There was a long pause on the other end, just enough time for the tension in my chest to squeeze harder. "You sure you want to go digging there, man? You know what could happen if that's legit." "I'm sure. I need to know." He sighed, probably remembering what we'd both known about this kind of thing. One wrong move, and the fallout could take a lot more than just a merger. "All right, hold on." I could hear him clicking away at his keyboard, the sound dragging on for what felt like an eternity. Then he came back on the line. "Yeah, it's still active. No one's touched it, but it's still valid." My stomach dropped, and for a second, all the air seemed to leave the room. It was real. "Thanks, Matt," I said, trying to keep the knot in my throat from creeping up. "You know this is trouble, right? That deal's gonna implode if that thing's triggered. You better be careful." "I know." I hung up, my hands trembling a little now. The quiet after the conversation felt like it weighed a ton. I could almost hear the chaos Derek would unleash if someone found out about this. But it wasn't about Derek. Not anymore. I sat there for a while, staring at the screen, watching the cursor blink back at me, waiting. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vengeful, but I was tired. Tired of being the guy no one noticed, the guy who cleaned up the messes in the background while the suits got all the glory. I wasn't invisible anymore. I knew what had to be done, and I didn't have to hide anymore. I wasn't going to sit back and watch while they played king and pawn with other people's lives. I wasn't going to let them sweep this under the rug like they always did with everything else. I decided right then and there, I was going to file the claim. I wasn't doing it to get back at Derek or the board. I wasn't doing it for a payday or to prove a point. I was doing it because I was done with being ignored, done with being overlooked. I picked up the phone again. I didn't care who heard me. The system might be rigged, but I wasn't going to let them rig this one, not without a fight. And I knew whatever happened next, it was going to be the last time they could ever dismiss me. The next day, I walked into a notary office on my lunch break, just like I'd planned. The place smelled like stale coffee and old paper, the kind of place where nothing ever really changed. It felt fitting. I barely made eye contact with the clerk as I handed over the merger contract and pointed to the clause I'd flagged. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me, but I wasn't about to second guess it. $5. That's all it took. I paid in cash, just in case. No company credit card, no business expenses. I wasn't about to leave a trail that could come back to bite me. I filed the claim with the state, officially, notified myself by mail. I kept the receipt tucked in my pocket, like it was a personal victory I hadn't yet earned. Back at the office, everything felt exactly the same. Same hum of the air conditioning, same sterile lighting, same white walls that seemed to suck the life out of the place. No one knew yet. I pretended nothing happened. I didn't walk with any more confidence, didn't flash any secret smiles. I didn't talk to anyone more than I usually did. I just went through the motions, processing requests, answering emails, quietly biding my time. 2 days passed, and that's when the doubt started creeping in. What if I'd overplayed my hand? What if this whole thing was a mistake? Maybe I didn't have enough to back it up. Maybe I was about to make things a lot harder for myself. It wasn't like I could go back and undo it. The claim was filed. I couldn't take it back, and I wasn't the type to back down once I'd committed. But the doubt still gnawed at me, like a rat nibbling at the edges of my thoughts. Then on day 3, I started to hear the murmurs. It began with the usual office chatter, the sort of whispers that spread like wildfire whenever anything out of the ordinary happened. But this was different. There was an edge to it, something thicker, something more urgent. Some outsider filed a claim. Licenses frozen. The deal stalled. I kept my head down, didn't make eye contact with anyone. I couldn't help but notice Derek, though. He was pacing outside the executive offices, his face flushed with anger, his hands running through his hair like he couldn't decide whether to pull it out or pull himself together. I'd never seen him like that. He was usually cool, collected, always in control. But this was panic. I didn't stick around to eavesdrop. I didn't have to. I could hear enough just by the tension in the air, the change in the rhythm of the office. People were on edge. Something big was happening, and I had a feeling it was about to blow up. I didn't let it show. I stayed glued to my desk, scanning spreadsheets, answering calls, anything to keep from drawing attention to myself. But now, Derek didn't look through me. He didn't look at me at all. Before, when I passed him in the hallway, he might nod or give me a quick smile. But now, his eyes slid right past me, like I wasn't even there, like I didn't exist. It was a small shift, but it was a shift. I stayed low for the next couple of hours. My stomach churned, but I didn't let it show. The legal team was scrambling behind closed doors. I could hear raised voices, clipped sentences. They were trying to figure out how to fix this, how to spin it. I wasn't stupid. I knew they were already working on damage control. But the more they tried to hide it, the more it felt like the storm was building, the calm before the crash. And the strangest thing was, I wasn't scared. I wasn't even worried anymore. I knew something was coming. I just didn't know what it would look like. By the end of the day, I was called into Derek's office. I'd known it was coming, but that didn't make it any easier. He didn't even look at me when I walked in, just motioned for me to sit across from his polished mahogany desk. He was all corporate sweet now, like he was carefully selecting his words, sugarcoating whatever venom he was about to spill. His voice was low, steady, but there was a crack of irritation behind it that he couldn't hide. "I don't know what your angle is here," Derek started, sitting back in his chair, fingers steepled like he was playing the part of a mastermind. "But you've gone too far this time." I didn't speak. I just watched him. I wasn't going to let him intimidate me, not now. "I've got a company to run, and you've sabotaged everything. That claim you filed? You've thrown a wrench into a deal we've worked months on. You've hurt Harmon Freight. You've hurt us all." He paused for effect, waiting for me to respond. But I didn't bite. The words were coming. I could feel it. The sound of his voice bouncing off the sterile walls of his office made it feel like we were in some kind of sick theater. But it was real. He was rattled. He dropped the corporate mask for a second, just a flicker of the man underneath. "What the hell were you thinking?" I finally spoke, quiet but firm. "I flagged it early. I pointed it out. You ignored it. The clause is still there, Derek. You had a chance to fix it. I followed the law. If anyone's sabotaging this deal, it's you. His eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I could see the anger leaking through the professionalism. He leaned forward, his fingers curling into fists. You think you're some kind of hero? You think you're doing us all a favor? I didn't respond to that. I didn't need to. But Derek wasn't done. He straightened up, shifting back into his CEO persona, the one that had been polished and rehearsed. He dropped the threat like a weight. Name your number, he said, voice smooth as glass. You want a payday for this? I'll make sure you're taken care of. Just name your price and we'll make this go away. All of it. My stomach twisted, but I stayed calm. He didn't get it. He never would. This wasn't about money, wasn't about getting some kind of payoff for myself. No, I said, shaking my head slowly. It's not about money, Derek. It's about respect. He blinked at me, confusion flashing across his face for a split second, and I could see the gears turning. He wasn't used to people saying no. He wasn't used to being questioned. I'm done being treated like a fixture, I went on, my voice steady but sharp. I'm done sitting in the background, fixing problems, while you and the rest of the suits take the credit. You've never seen me for anything more than someone to push around. I stood up then, slow and deliberate, not wanting to make a show of it, but the air between us had changed, thickened, like I could feel the weight of all the years of being invisible and ignored in that room. I didn't need to shout, didn't need to raise my voice to get the point across. Derek's face had darkened, his jaw clenched tight as if he were weighing his next move. I could see the frustration in his eyes, but there was something else there now too, something deeper. He wasn't looking at me like an employee anymore. He was looking at me like a threat. You think this is some kind of game? He growled, leaning forward again. You really want to keep going down this road? I'll make sure you regret it. I'll ruin you. I met his gaze without flinching, no hesitation. You're welcome to try, I said, my voice colder than I meant it to be. But I'm not backing down. For a second, it looked like Derek might say something else. Maybe lash out, maybe make an empty threat. But instead, he just stared at me, his face hardening into something unreadable. The power dynamics had shifted. He wasn't in control anymore, and he didn't know how to handle it. I didn't wait for him to speak again. I didn't need to. I turned and walked out. No yelling, no ego, just the facts, just the truth. I was done being his pawn. And in that moment, I knew he realized it. For the first time, I wasn't just another staff member. I wasn't someone who would be pushed around or ignored. I was a threat. That night, I stayed late again. Not because I had to, but because I needed the space to think. The office felt colder, quieter than usual. The hum of the air conditioner was the only sound, and it kept me company while I ran through everything that had happened. Derek's anger still simmered in my chest, but I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't shaking. Then, as I was about to shut down for the night, I saw the email from HR. Subject, formal investigation notice. I opened it, already knowing what was coming. Breach of conduct. The words jumped off the screen. They were accusing me of everything from insubordination to sabotage, claiming my actions had jeopardized the company's reputation and operations. They said they were investigating me for violating company policy. I wasn't surprised. Derek had made his move. He was going to try to control the narrative, make me look like the villain before the board got wind of the real story. The next morning, when I logged into my work account, it was locked. The familiar dashboard stared back at me, but the access was gone, like I'd been wiped off the system altogether. I wasn't just being investigated, I was being isolated. I didn't flinch. I already had a plan in motion. I'd hired a lawyer the night I filed the claim, just to cover myself. By the time I showed up at his office the next morning, he was already on it. They're coming for you, he said, voice calm but sharp, like he'd seen this kind of thing before. HR is going to smear you, no question about it. They'll dig up whatever they can, and they'll make it look like you're the one who screwed everything up. But they don't have a leg to stand on. We spent the next couple of hours going over the details. I explained what had happened, how I'd flagged the clause, how Derek had brushed me off, how they'd locked me out of my account, trying to cut me off from everything. When we finished, he told me he was sending a formal cease and desist to HR for retaliation. I agreed. I wasn't going to let them paint me as the bad guy. We started the paper trail, just like I knew we had to. Back at the office, the rumors started to spread like wildfire. I overheard whispers in the break room, murmurs in the hallway. He's under investigation. People avoided me, like I was some kind of disease they didn't want to catch. I didn't blame them. They were scared, caught in the middle of this corporate tug of war. But I didn't care. I wasn't worried about what they thought of me anymore. I knew this game. I'd been part of it for years, watching it from the sidelines while everyone else played their part. Derek had his way of doing things, running roughshod over anyone who got in his way. But now I was playing. I kept my head down, did my job, and ignored the cold shoulders. But I also kept the lawyer in the loop. We prepped a restraining order just in case they tried to push any further. If they kept trying to paint me as a villain, we'd take it public. We'd make it clear who was really behind all of this. But the truth was, Derek was already losing control. He knew it. I knew it. And now, even the people who had once looked past me were starting to see the cracks. And this time, I wasn't going to let him fix them. The next morning, Richard Bowles, the board chair, called me into his office. The summons was brief, no subject line, just my name and a time. I didn't ask questions. I knew what it meant. When I walked in, he was sitting behind his desk, calm, collected as usual. The kind of guy who made decisions like he'd been doing it his whole life. I was a little surprised not to see his usual entourage of assistants or even a lawyer, just him. Just the facts. He motioned for me to sit across from him. I didn't waste any time. I slid a thick folder onto his desk, opened it, and laid out the timeline. Clear, simple, straight to the point. I raised the concern about the licensing clause when I first spotted it, I said, keeping my tone calm, like I was giving a standard report. I flagged it. I pointed out the risk to the deal. Derek dismissed it, said we had attorneys for that. I could see his eyes flicker, but he didn't interrupt. He just watched me. I filed the claim with the state, all legal, no company resources. Paid the $5 myself, filed it myself. I notified myself by mail. I placed the hard copies in front of him, copies of the email from HR, the claim I'd filed, the cease and desist letter from my lawyer. Every document had its place in the story, and I made sure he could follow every step. Richard flipped through the pages slowly, eyes scanning the details. He didn't rush, didn't skip a word. There was something about the way he looked at it that told me he wasn't just hearing the words. I could feel him weighing the situation, seeing it from all angles. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers, like he was trying to make sense of it all. The silence stretched between us, thick with the kind of tension that didn't need words to be felt. "You've given us a lot to think about," he said finally, his voice steady but with a hint of something I couldn't quite place. I nodded. I didn't need to say anything more. I'd laid out the facts, and now it was his move. I stood up to leave, and as I turned to walk out, I felt something shift in the air. It was subtle, but I could feel it, like the weight of the room had changed. Derek's influence wasn't as solid as it had been the day before. There was a crack in the facade, and I could sense it deep in my gut. The next morning, the buzz in the office was different. I could hear the quiet conversations behind closed doors. There was a heaviness to the whispers now, like they knew something was coming, but weren't sure what. One by one, the executives were summoned. Doors closed behind them, and the usual hum of the office slowed to a standstill. It was like the entire building had collectively held its breath, waiting for something to break. I kept my head down, pretending to be busy, but I could feel it, the shift. Something was happening. The power had moved just a little, but enough to make me know it. The way people looked at me had changed, just slightly. No more whispers behind my back, no more cold shoulders. Now, they watched with a new kind of attention. Derek had been in charge, but for the first time, I could see cracks in his armor. And as the minutes ticked by, I knew something was about to shift in a way none of us could take back. The boardroom felt different when I walked in. There was a hush in the air, thick and heavy. The table was full, every board member sitting in their usual spots, except this time Derek was there too, his back straight, his jaw set like he had a shield up. Richard sat at the head of the table, a folder in front of him, the thickest one of the bunch. He didn't smile when I walked in, didn't even acknowledge me with a nod. He just opened the folder and started reading. His voice was steady, measured, as if he was reading a textbook rather than the kind of life-changing report that could tear a company apart. Today we're addressing the findings surrounding the merger clause, the claim filed with the state, and the subsequent actions taken by internal parties. I sat down, trying to keep my face neutral, though my heart was pounding. I had no idea how this would play out, but I knew one thing. I was going to speak the truth, and if it wasn't enough, then that was on them, not me. Richard read through the findings, how I'd flagged the clause, how the claim had been filed, how HR had retaliated, and how I'd followed every legal process. He went through it all, a calm, methodical recount of events. Then he looked up. "We'll hear from Mr. Miller next," Richard said, turning his gaze toward me. Every set of eyes in the room followed. There was no mistaking it. They were all focused on me now. I stood and laid it out, clear and simple. No emotion, just facts. As I'd already explained to Richard, I'd followed every rule and documented every step. HR's response made it clear who they were trying to protect. I glanced at Derek briefly, but I didn't linger. I wasn't here to engage with him, not yet. The claim was filed legally. I notified myself by mail. I kept everything documented. No matter what anyone says about it now, I followed the process. I sat back down, my chest tight, but my hands steady. This was it. No more hiding behind the scenes. This was my moment. Richard turned to Derek. The tension in the room thickened like someone had pulled a rope taut between us. Derek didn't even seem to blink, but his eyes were narrowed, calculating. He shifted in his seat, like he was preparing for a fight. Richard's voice cut through the silence. "Mr. Langford, would you care to explain your actions regarding this situation?" Derek's gaze flicked to me for just a second. Nothing more than a flash, but it was enough to see the contempt there. He leaned forward, fixing his eyes on Richard. "I was aware of the concern," Derek said, his voice tight, his words clipped. "I dismissed it because I trusted our legal team to handle it. It wasn't a priority." The room went quiet, but I could feel the ripple of disbelief running through the others. It wasn't just that Derek had ignored the warning, it was that he'd dismissed it so casually, like it was beneath him. Richard didn't say anything for a moment, just stared at Derek. Then, one of the board members, a woman who'd always kept her distance from the messier side of things, spoke up. "You knew about the clause and dismissed it?" she asked, her voice sharp. Derek's face flushed, but he didn't back down. "Yes, we had other priorities. I didn't think it was worth our time." One by one, the others started chiming in, pressing Derek for more answers, and with every response, his excuses seemed weaker. The more they pushed, the more defensive he became, his arrogance turning into panic. No one was buying it, not even the people who had always been in his corner. The final blow came from Richard, who asked a question that seemed to hang in the air for an eternity. "Mr. Langford, you were warned about this. You chose to ignore it. How does that justify the actions taken against Mr. Miller?" Derek's mouth tightened. "I didn't think it was a big deal," he said, his voice lowering. "It seemed insignificant at the time. But it wasn't insignificant. Not anymore." Richard turned to the rest of the board. He didn't have to ask for a vote. The room was already moving, already making up its mind. There was no one left to defend Derek, not even his closest allies. "Mr. Langford," Richard said, his voice heavy, final. "Effective immediately, you were suspended from your duties, pending further review." Derek's face turned red. His eyes locked onto me, a glare colder than anything I'd ever felt before. It was like he was seeing me for the first time, not as someone beneath him, not as the guy who took care of the small stuff in the background, but as a real threat. I didn't look away. I didn't flinch. I held his stare, meeting his anger head on. For the first time, I felt the power in that moment. The power that came from standing up, from not backing down. He might have been the one at the top, but the way I saw it, he had just lost his crown. 2 days later, the memo hit my inbox. No fanfare, no press release, just an internal notice. Derek was out. It was the simple, no thank you for your service, no grand gesture. Just a line that read, effective immediately. Mr. Langford is suspended, pending review. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. I'd done what I came to do. The fallout was still in the air, but it wasn't my problem anymore. Then came the real surprise. Richard called me in. "You're being offered a new position," he said, his voice steady. But there was something else behind it. Respect, maybe. "Director of Contract Risk Oversight," he said, laying out the details in front of me. I'd heard of the role before, but only in passing, as a vague title that didn't hold much weight. This time, though, it was different. I felt a mix of caution and curiosity. "Who do I report to?" I asked. Richard didn't hesitate. "You'll report directly to the board. Full authority." That was the catch. Full authority. The words hung in the air. For a moment, it felt like a test, like he was waiting for me to blink or hesitate, but I didn't. I nodded. "I'll need autonomy too. No micromanagement. I need the freedom to make decisions, especially when it comes to contracts and legal reviews." Richard leaned back in his chair, thinking it over. The silence between us stretched long, but I wasn't going to rush him. This was my shot, and I wasn't about to let it slip. Finally, he nodded. "Agreed, it's yours. You'll have the power to make the changes you see fit." I shook his hand, firm. No excitement, no fanfare. I was just doing what I was supposed to do. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into reworking the merger contract. We took it line by line, page by page. Every clause, every detail, nothing slipped through. We worked with the legal team, double-checked everything, and cleaned up the mess Derek had left behind. This time, no one skipped the fine print. No egos, no shortcuts, just solid, straightforward work. The atmosphere in the office had shifted too. People started treating me differently. At first, it was subtle. A shift in how they spoke to me, how they included me in conversations. They weren't afraid of me anymore. They weren't looking over their shoulders, worried I'd expose their mistakes. They started to act like I belonged in the room, like I was one of them. It wasn't like before. Back then, I was just the guy who kept things running in the background. Now, I was the guy with the authority to change things, to make the decisions that mattered. And while people respected that, they also stopped looking at me like I was some threat. I didn't let it go to my head. I didn't brag. I didn't need to. I was here to do the work. That's all I cared about. The deal finally closed, clean, no missed clauses, no last-minute surprises. Derek's mess was fixed, and we moved forward, the merger now solid and locked in. But it wasn't about the deal for me. It was about proving to myself that I could stand in this space, not as someone who had to hide in the shadows, but as someone who could get things done, someone who belonged. And when I walked into the boardroom now, no one treated me like I didn't matter. They listened. They respected the process. And I didn't have to fight for it anymore. I had earned it. My new office is nothing special. No view of the city skyline, no fancy furniture. Just a desk, a chair, and a quiet space. It's smaller than I expected, tucked away in a corner of the building with the faint hum of the warehouse in the background. But it's mine. I sit back in the chair, sipping my coffee, staring out at the lot where the delivery trucks roll in and out, the engines low and constant. The world keeps moving, the same way it always has, but now I'm part of it in a way I never was before. Full circle. There's something strangely satisfying about the stillness of it all. No buzz of excitement, no crowd of people to congratulate me. Just a quiet moment to let it sink in. The door opens and Richard walks in. In his hand, there's an org chart. He hands it to me without a word, and I glance down at it. There's my name, bolded at the top. Director of Contract Risk Oversight. Real title, real department. You earned this, Richard says. His voice is steady, like he's been expecting this moment as much as I have. I nod, but I don't say anything. I know what he means. It took a long time to get here. Too many years working in the background, fixing problems no one cared about. Too many times being told to stay in my lane, to stay quiet, to not step out of line. But my lane? It led right to the damn driver's seat. I think about Derek, about all the times I watched him walk around with that cocky smile, acting like he was untouchable. Last I heard, he's advising some startup out west. Doesn't matter. He doesn't matter. I'm not chasing headlines or grudges. I've got work to do. If someone like me can change the course of a $120 million deal just by reading the fine print that everyone else skipped, maybe the real power isn't at the top. Maybe it's in knowing where the pressure points are and having the guts to press. I didn't win to prove a point. I didn't do it for any of the usual reasons. I did it because I refused to lose quietly.